What's that?
They can hear you now.
They can hear me now. Okay, good. Well, I turned the mic back on. Okay, cool. So last week, Father Hal walked us through why Jesus matters, right? And he made the point that Jesus can't be reduced, right? We can't reduce him to being just a good person or a great moral teacher because he doesn't allow us to leave it there, right? Because of the things that he said about himself, and because essentially that he himself is making the claim that he is God, right? So, well, tonight we're going to look at another claim that Jesus, well, several other claims that Jesus makes around the idea, right, that he came to reveal the Father. That he came to reveal the Father. So we believe in a Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And Jesus came to reveal the Father. And this is unlike any other, well, okay, aside from, Judaism and Islam, Jesus comes to reveal that each of us is made for relationship. You don't really see this in other sort of world religions, certainly not Eastern religions, other spiritualities, that we are actually made for, designed to be in relationship with God, right? That concretely, that clearly. But this is what Jesus comes to reveal, right? And this is what Jesus wants us to know. The baseline answer, Jesus wants us to know God as he really is. Jesus comes to reveal God as he really is, right? How does he do this? In his words and in his deeds, he reveals to us that God wants relationship. And he does it in a way that none of us anticipates, and many of us, actually, myself included, don't always experience. We don't always experience God as benevolent, loving Father, right? But this is what he came to reveal, that the all-powerful creator of the universe, the creator of all things, is not only his Father, but our Father in him. That's what Jesus really wants all of humanity and each of us to know, that you have a God who is both Father and he loves you, right? A God who is Father, who loves us, who's for us, who sent his Son so that we could know him. But what happens with many of us, right, because of the way the world is, maybe because of the way that our family was, we hear that kind of announcement that God is Father, and there's a gut level reaction, right? A reality check. Because for many of us, that experience of God as Father doesn't really, sometimes it doesn't have something to map onto, right? All you have to do is pick up the news, look on the internet, and see that there's stories of pain and brokenness, woundedness, and evil all over the place. If God is loving, benevolent Father, how can these things be true, right? No doubt, this group gathered here tonight, everyone in the room, there's plenty of pain to go around. There's lots of brokenness, there's lots of hurt. Let's get down to the relational level, though, of God as Father, right? We live in a broken culture. It's no secret. Divorce is rampant. There's probably people listening right now in this very room who've been impacted by divorce, and it affects our understanding of fatherhood. Let's take it down a deeper level. Many of us, our fathers might have been there, but we've never experienced a father who's loving, who's present to us, who is with us, sees us, and knows us, right? And that can be for a variety of reasons. We might have felt abandoned by our father. Perhaps he left, either by death or by abandonment, or maybe he was absent, right? Through death or divorce. We've had an experience of being abandoned, right? Others, maybe you may have had a father who was either physically or verbally abusive. You just want to acknowledge these realities, right? Because they affect how we view God, naturally. If God is loving Father, then in some way I make a natural connection between my own Father and who God the Father is, right? Some of us may have had a father who was sort of preoccupied, right? Didn't do anything wrong, per se. Good man, but he just wasn't really there, right? I love my father. He's a good man. He was mostly preoccupied with work, right? He was a good football coach. He was there for me, but he wasn't really there, right? So what happens for many of us is that when we hear Jesus say God is a loving father that wants you to return to his embrace, is that we come to a place of denial or anger or resentment at the thought of God as loving father. Well, here's what I'd like you to know. Here's what I'd like you to do, rather, during this session. I'd like to encourage you to allow Jesus, who reveals the Father, to invite you to know a Father who is unlike any father you have ever known. Allow Jesus to invite you to know a Father who is unlike any father you've ever known. Some of us have had good fathers. I don't want to not every dad. Not every dad is a bad guy, and most fathers are well-meaning good men, right? If your dad was great, I want you to go home and give him a hug. Well, if you still go home and give him a hug and just say thank you, right? But Jesus wants all of us to know the Father's love. So how do we do this? How do we enter into this reality? How do we come to actually know this in our core? Well, I heard this story about a mother who was sitting with her little girl. And the mother was having a cup of coffee, and the girl was sitting on the floor drawing intently. And the mother asked the daughter, what are you drawing, honey? And the daughter says, Mommy, I'm drawing a picture of God. And the mother sort of chuckles because she's an adult and she knows things, right? She says, well, honey, that's nice, but no one knows what God looks like. The daughter laughs herself and says, you will when I'm done. Well, funny joke, right? But this is exactly what Jesus comes to do. He comes to earth to live amongst his people and to reveal to us who the Father is. And he does this by the very life that he lives. This is what Jesus said. If you know me, then you will also know the Father. He who has seen me has seen the Father. So what we want to be able to do is to look at Jesus, his words, and his actions to see what the Father is like. Later in the New Testament, in the letter to the Hebrews, it says, the Son is the exact representation of God. Another translation reads like this: Jesus is the mirror image of God the Father. Right? We don't want to be irreverent, but there's a sort of slang phrase for this, right? He's a chip off the old block, the spitting image of his Father. So we want to look at Jesus, at his life, if we want to see the Father, right? We've all kind of experienced this, right? Where you meet somebody and they're like, oh, I've had this. Oh, you're Gail's son. It's like, yeah, I'm a little loud. I got a kind of a big nose. But we've all experienced this, right? Where we have in us reflections of our own parents. Well, this is what Jesus is for God the Father. But unlike us, right, who are imperfect resemblances of our earthly parents, Jesus is the perfect image of the Father, who is God. And this is what you see in the Gospels, right? When you read the Gospels, you see the most amazing portrayal of the Son who represents the Father. And this is really, for me, I after my kind of initial conversion, I got kind of I read my way into Christianity, or oh, this makes a lot of sense. And A, and then B, and then C, and then D, and then if this is true, this has to be true. But for me, I didn't really know who Jesus was. So after I sort of said yes to Christianity, I was like, I should probably figure out who this Jesus is. And for me, that was just picking up the Bible, right? And it was watching a lot of Jesus of Nazareth, that cheesy 70s miniseries. That was actually how I learned my Bible stories. But It was encountering Jesus in the Gospels. And so if you've not picked up the Gospels, like if Bible reading isn't part of your daily practice or part of your regular routine, I encourage you to just pick up the Gospels. Start there, right? Take a couple minutes each day and go there with the question of, who is this man? And what does he reveal? What is his heart like? Because what we see in the Gospels is a man, Jesus, right, who's so winsome and loving to everyone that he meets, everyone that he encounters, all types of people. And for me, reading about him in the scriptures, reading about him, with the tax collectors and the prostitutes, when I first read those stories, I was like, okay, maybe there's hope. There's hope for me too, right? If Jesus is like loving to these people as well, maybe there's hope for me, right? So if you haven't read a gospel before, I dare you to do it. There's a lot of accounts, right, of Jesus sort of just doing his thing out in the world, encountering people. And I want to look at one in particular with you tonight. It was actually referenced, no, different thing. It was referenced at something I was at earlier that you all weren't here for. It's the story of Zacchaeus from Luke chapter 19, okay? Let me set the stage for you, right? Jesus is passing through an affluent town called Jericho, okay? Large crowds of people following him. At this point, he's got a following, right? Not only because of what he says, right? He says eloquent, beautiful things, profound things. He speaks like nobody else. But he also is doing signs and wonders, right? He's healing people. I actually don't know at this point if he's raised anybody from the dead, but like pretty amazing stuff. So people are being healed from all sorts of physical illnesses. They're being delivered of evil spirits. So there's large crowds following him with this idea that he truly might be the long-awaited Messiah, the Christ. And so he comes into this town, and there's a tax collector named Zacchaeus who's curious about Jesus, right? He's heard about him, heard the things that he's said and done, and he sort of wants to know, who is this guy? Now, tax collectors, you should know, you might already know, they're hated. The Jews hated tax collectors, right? Because these are Jews who are working for the Romans. They're considered sinners, people you wouldn't associate with. So that's Zacchaeus. You might also know from the gospel account, Zacchaeus is a pretty short guy, right? Like if we're casting the movie or the mini-series again, right? It's probably like a sort of a Danny DeVito type situation. Very small man, right? So here's Zacchaeus, hated, scorned, small in stature, right? Like height challenged, okay? Waiting for Jesus of Nazareth, trying to get to the front of the crowd so that he can just get a glimpse of this man who has this great reputation. So what does he do? He climbs a tree. So you've got this stocky little guy climbing up to the top of the tree. And now, at this point, he doesn't know what's going to happen, right? He's just hoping to catch a glimpse. But what happens? He has no idea what God has in store for him, right? The last thing on his mind is that he would actually encounter this man, right? He's just trying to get a glimpse. But it happens, right? By divine providence, Jesus comes directly under the tree, looks up at Zacchaeus, calls him by name, and says to him, Zacchaeus, come down quickly because I want to come and stay in your home. Zacchaeus comes down quickly. By the time he's on the ground again, his life is radically altered. His life will not be the same after this moment. So some of these other church people, right, the other Jews, they're not too happy. Who is this guy? He sat in my pew earlier, right? How could this long-awaited rabbi, Messiah, possibly want to go into the house of this sinner? How dare he? I've been waiting here all day to see him, right? Zacchaeus hears this, and he says to the Lord, I will give away half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've defrauded, if I've ripped anybody off, I will pay back that amount 4 times. What does Jesus say to this scorned, hated man this tax collector and sinner. Jesus says, "Today salvation has come upon this house, and the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost." From the first point, right, where God the Son speaks to Zacchaeus by name and invites him into fellowship. Going into this man's house, right, indicates that he wants to be with him. He wants not only to enter his house, but to be in relationship with him. And Zacchaeus understands the whole thing. He's not new to this, right? That another Jew would be okay coming into his house, it's transformative. He's called by name and invited into relationship. And he's been transformed radically at the place that he treasures the most, right? Tax collector, what does he care most about? Wealth, money. Precisely at that place where he thought he'd find purpose in life. Why else would a Jew do this, right? Why else would a Jew change sides, go work for the Romans? He thought this was going to change his life, right? Precisely at that place, it's now replaced with the true purpose of his life, relationship with God. So he's willing to say at that point, right? I'll give away half of my possessions to the poor. If I've ripped anyone off, I'll repay it 4 times. How does this radical shift happen in the course of minutes? Well, he's looked right into the face of God. And what does he find staring back at him? Unconditional love, right? A sinner, scorned, hated. Wealth at the center of his life becomes the vehicle of transformation. Isn't that awesome? Well, the truth is, right, Jesus wants this same encounter, not just with Zacchaeus, not just with the people in the Bible, in these 2,000-year-old stories, right? But with each of us. I want you to also think about, like, Zacchaeus is at one end of the spectrum, right? Like, for all intents and purposes, he's wealthy, he's sort of got it together, right? But at the other end, Jesus also encounters the poor, the dispossessed, people with all kinds of serious illnesses, the lame, the blind, everybody. Working class, commercial fishermen, right? The apostles, lawyers, teachers, mothers, prostitutes, you name it, right? Everyone is invited to know the love of God, manifested through the Son, Jesus, so that we might be drawn back into the love of the Father. Okay, so Jesus comes to show us the Father's love, and this is the way that he does it in relationship. Let's talk for a second about the characteristics of that love. I'm going to give you 4 characteristics of the Father's love that Jesus reveals. The first one, the Father's love is his initiative, right? The Father seeks us out. It's why you're here tonight, right? Because the Father longs to love you. He comes looking for us in the same way that Jesus came looking for Zacchaeus. He comes at his initiative and he calls each one of us by name. Second, the Father's love is unconditional. Now, you've probably heard that so many times that it can sound a little meaningless, right? Yes, God's love is unconditional. Unconditional love, right? Well, you've also seen it, right? In your own life. Maybe you've looked into the face of your own child. Is there anything your child could do that would ever make you not love them, right? It's unconditional. He's perfect, and his love is perfect. It's unending. This means everything, right? It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've been, what you've done. The Father's love is unconditional. There's nothing you could ever do to turn him away. the Father's love is also a free gift. It's not based on your merit, whether you think you're good enough, or whether you think you're too unworthy, right? It goes both ways. You'll never be good enough, and you'll never be worthy, right? Even if you've done the most terrible things in the world, right? Your being loved is not merited by you. Even if you were the greatest saint in the world, right? Saint Therese knows this sort of through and through, where she knows even at the end of her life, this great saint who's canonized now by the church, she says, everything I've ever done adds up to nothing. Because nothing that we can do merits God's love. But gifts have to be received. Just like any other gift, you can accept it or you can reject it. So it might be hard to get to that place of feeling, getting beyond feeling worthy or unworthy, merited or unmerited. But eventually, we have to say yes to the gift. And lastly, the Father's love is personal. So it's not an abstract love. It's personal. He knows each of us. He calls each of us by name, right? Jesus puts it this way in the Gospel of Matthew. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground without your Father's will. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. You are of more value than many sparrows. I had an experience, sort of like first gut punch experience of God's love. I'll tell you more about it later, but I was probably about 26, and I was going to, I had gone so far as to apply to a missionary organization, right? And part of the application process for this missionary work was, when did you encounter Jesus? How was your life different before, and how is it different after? And I had no real words to answer that question. It just didn't really compute for me. And so I went to Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, in the Eucharist. And again, we can get into more of this later. But God's presence in the Eucharist. And I asked that question, like, Jesus, if you want me to do this thing, if you want me to do this mission work, you need to help me answer this question, because as yet it makes no sense to me. And in that moment, in prayer before the Lord, I had this overwhelming experience that he knew me, that he loved me, and that his love for me that had brought me all the way to this point had been so perfect, had been so personal, had been so providential that he just knew me through and through, right? And again, I'll kind of share more about that later. But that's the kind of knowing that we're talking about here. We're not talking about intellectual knowledge. That's good. But it's that Hebrew word yada, which means like knowing the way that a husband knows a wife, that deeply, that intimately, right? And he desires this for each one of us. We see this sort of in the culture, right? We're grasping around to know and be known. All the while, the creator of the universe knows us better than we can ever possibly know ourselves and is waiting for us to come to him. To know him and be known by him, right? So whether you've been a faithful church-going Catholic or Christian, whether you're baptized or from another world religion, maybe you're a dropout Catholic or Christian, right? Maybe you've fallen away. Maybe you're an atheist or agnostic. It doesn't matter. The God of the universe who created you wants you to know that he is a loving Father that has created you for a purpose, and that purpose is found in Jesus. This is what he comes to reveal. Benedict XVI put it this way. I think Benedict XVI gets a bad rap for being like just always super lofty and super intellectual, but this guy knew the human heart. The source of Christian joy, he said, is the certainty of being loved by God. Loved personally by your Creator, by the one who holds the entire universe in his hands and loves each one of us and the whole great human family with a passionate and faithful love. A love greater than our infidelities and sins, a love which forgives. That's the truth, right? That's the good news. And it's incredible. It has the power to change our lives, right? Each one of us, if we let it. I want to share with you a short video now that's sort of a modern day parable of the Father's love for each one of us.